This is the best deck in Marvel Snap, except it's actually two decks. Since his buff to 612 and the release of several cards that have gone well with him, Thanos has become a fixture of the metagame, first via Goliath unlocking the ongoing Thanos archetype, and then via Strange Supreme, whose synergy with Thanos lies largely in eating the stones and becoming unapproachably large. One of the most underrated buffs that any card has ever gotten is the fact that Thanos, a card that starts in your hand, gained power up to 12. This has been a very relevant piece of increased power and is, in my opinion, the major reason why this deck has roared back into prominence. It's not just all these additional synergy pieces, it's a 20% boost to the card that you are guaranteed to have every single game that you play. However, there are two builds of Thanos, and I strongly believe that either of them, or both of them, could be accurately described as the best deck in the game. This is the current iteration of Thanos Ongoing. I believe this 12 was pioneered by Zuns, but Thanos Ongoing has existed basically since the release of Goliath, with the first iterations of it coming from Derek. Now, these are very powerful lists. The basic premise here is pretty straightforward. Thanks to the fact that 3 of the stones have ongoings, you are getting extra procs on Goliath, you are getting extra procs on your Blue Marvel, and you are getting extra procs on your Spectrum. The stones want you to fill the board up, so this is a deck that requires a little bit more thought than you'd think. There are certainly going to be cases where you run into board space issues and you have to sacrifice things like curving out into a Wiccan. One of the other things that really pushed this deck back to prominence was a general reduction in the amount of Rocket and Groot people are playing. Rocket and Groot, pretty obviously good against Thanos since it's very often going to get about 4 procs, which is a very dangerous thing to deal with. This is a powerful, powerful deck, and to me, since it's been created, since its inception, really, it has been the level 0 deck of the metagame that you just have to account for in all forms that it runs into. Now, because it is an ongoing deck, and because it is a Thanos deck that is explicitly about filling up the board, its weaknesses are very pronounced. Cards like Killmonger are incredibly good when you are counting on Blue Marvel and, of course, Spectrum to be relevant board-wide buffs. Killmonger is even better when you're talking about counting on the ongoing effects of some stones in order to justify future plays. Cards like Soul Stone and Space Stone have relevant ongoing effects that, when removed, make this deck a lot easier to deal with. One of the interesting things about playing against this deck is that it really tests your ability to understand board space economy, whether you play with it or against it. Playing against this deck, a lot of what you're going to be having to do is figure out what exactly they're going to be adding to their lanes and how able you are to beat that kind of stuff. Since this is a deck that is very often on turn 6 looking at maybe 1 or 2 empty spaces, it can be fairly easy to calculate where they're going. However, since this is a deck that also runs Spectrum and Blue Marvel, that additional will they or won't they makes it very difficult to figure out if you're supposed to be playing around the 12 power that Thanos can add, or around the 7 power Spectrum adds, but also adding more to the other lanes. This is the dynamic that keeps this deck afloat. It is a deck that is using all of the parts of the Buffalo. Everything flows together. Your stones discount your Mockingbird and buff your Goliath. Your stones are what gives you the bodies in order to justify playing Blue Marvel and Spectrum, and your stones are the point of weakness that your opponents can attack. In addition, being an ongoing deck, it is fairly clear that there are some very good cards against you. In large part, this is alleviated by the fact that we don't have any hyper-invested ongoings. Things like a Captain Carter or a Moonstone that really, really lose when they get Enchantress. We just have cards that mostly lose when they get Enchantress. Blue Marvel getting Enchantress, really, really bad. but not nearly so bad as a lane that you were counting on, like a Captain Carter lane, getting Enchantress. So that generally is where this deck is at. It's not as weak to Enchantress stuff as you might think, but it is extremely weak to Killmonger stuff. The inclusion of Mobius and Mobius pushes this deck over the line in mirrors. This is a deck that is extremely powerful in Thanos pseudo mirrors, because against other ongoing decks, you're still going to be preventing the Thanos discount off of Time Stone and, of course, the Mockingbird discount, which is very crucial. And against decks that are looking to beat you, you have some upside there too. A lot of the other kinds of decks that are trying to beat you as a board go wide strategy or hazmat abomination decks, taking that off the table is quite powerful. But fundamentally, what makes this deck relevant in the metagame is that it is the Thanos deck that simply goes bigger than the other Thanos deck. While it does that, it has more defined weaknesses, so it is easier for other decks to target it. This is Strange Supreme Thanos, and it looks to alleviate some of the more obvious problems with the ongoing Thanos build. While the ongoing Thanos build is sort of the more blatantly powerful of these two lists, this is a deck that I think has better matchups across the board, or at the very least, feels like it's in more games generally than the alternative. The ongoing Thanos deck has a much closer to a will they or won't they interact with me in a meaningful way kind of play pattern, where meaningful interaction can be devastating and non-meaningful interaction just doesn't matter at all. Where this deck, your meaningful interaction, it can be good against you, but you have a lot of counterplay to the things that are typically good against you. Just for a couple of obvious ones, this is a deck that isn't nearly so vulnerable to Killmonger because Strange Supreme is very often eating the stones that would otherwise be dying to Killmonger. Now, this isn't a perfect solution. Like, you are sacrificing actual power for this. You don't get to be a Blue Marvel deck. You don't get to be a Spectrum deck. You lose numbers in a general sense, but Strange Supreme helps make up for that numbers and, in turn, creates its own weak spot in the deck, which is part of why you have not just Cosmo, but also Juggernaut to keep him protected from the final turn interaction that can be so powerful. Juggernaut, by the way, is a card that is not good in Thanos mirrors because everyone is filling up the entire board in those mirrors, but it is the kind of thing where when you think of this deck's ethos as being the Thanos deck that beats everything but the ongoing Thanos mirror, it makes a lot more sense. The amount of interaction that this deck can pack while also having a very large amount of power is unique. This is a deck that can create a giant Strange Supreme or use the stones to discount Mockingbird, either of which is plenty of subsidization and free power to allow your tech cards and Juggernaut to do the rest of the work. This is a powerful list that I think has a lot of utility, and frankly, if the other Thanos list didn't exist, I think this would be a very slam dunk obvious best deck in the game. But since the other Thanos list does exist, and it is kind of a bad matchup, this list ends up looking more balanced. If we're talking about what deck you'd play to beat basically everything else other than Thanos, this is a very strong contender. It is probably the most well-rounded deck in the game. There is not a single tech card that you can play against this list and feel utterly confident in, because not only do they have Cosmo and Juggernaut and Eliath, they have their own tech cards to deal with what you're doing as well. A very well-rounded, very powerful list, and I think it is easily a contender, along with the other Thanos list, for best deck in the game. So, which is actually better? I think it's pretty clear that neither of these have actually eclipsed the other. The more prominent weaknesses of the ongoing Thanos list are offset by a generally positive matchup into the Thanos list that has less prominent weaknesses. I think that's a really interesting dynamic. Personally, I think that it's cool that there are two Thanos lists that are doing very different things and that they have different matchup spreads into a metagame that is relatively favorable to people who are doing Killmonger and Enchantress stuff. It is a very interesting thing. There are a couple of general play tips that I'm going to give you for Thanos that I think are going to be applicable across both of these lists. They are, number one, you're going to have to be planning the entire game out based on what you are capable of doing. The number one thing that gets Thanos players in trouble is overplaying their hand, overcommitting to something like Wiccan, and running into situations where they just simply don't have enough board space in order to actually do what they want to do. This is alleviated by the Strange Supreme stuff. That is a very real thing. The fact that the Strange Supreme deck can be easier to play because of that is a mark in its favor, in my opinion, as someone who thinks that easier decks to play are generally a better option for most players. This is the main thing that people will run into with Thanos. Number two, I think that people should think a lot more about what Thanos lets you do and what your maximum power output is. These are not decks that get big very often. Or at least they're not decks that can get big with one card very often. Often, Thanos is the biggest thing on the board at 12 power. Now, it's a good rate, 12 power, a lot of the time. You get a 12 power indestructible guy for 5, that's pretty good rate. You really can't complain about that. But where this really matters is intersecting with point 1, the economy of your board spaces. If you have 3 spaces filled in a lane, your opponent pretty much knows that the most power you can put in that lane on turn 6 is going to be that 12 power. The decks that these sort of have created here are decks that do not have a lot of big number single cards. There's a lot of cards that add up to bigger numbers if they're supported. Things like Strange Supreme or Spectrum can play for 20 power some of the time, although Strange Supreme is not actually playing for all of that 20 power. He can represent it, though. That kind of stuff is there, but you don't necessarily have the ability to dump it all in one lane. In fact, in the ongoing Thanos deck, some of the time, the most power you can put in a lane is going to be a Spectrum in a lane with multiple ongoings in it, so you can get your 13 off of that, maybe 14 if you have a Blue Marvel there. That stuff comes up a lot. Do keep in mind your ability to reinforce lanes and how much you actually want to foreclose on future opportunities by playing out a bunch of stones early. Sometimes it's worth doing, and sometimes it's not. All right, y'all. Thank you for watching this breakdown on genuinely the best deck, parentheses S, close parentheses, in the game. I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. We are going to jump into some gameplay right now, and I hope you enjoy it. Y'all have a good one. Okay, Batroc. I see ya. I'm not sure I'd want to be ya. Batroc, Angela. Oh shit, they're cooking. Nope. I'm kind of just hoping to draw any card that's playable next turn. This makes sense to me. Nice. Would you look at that? And like, granted, they are very able to do that shit. I'm not gonna sit here and act like it's not. Best win rate deck according to Untapped. What sample size you're looking at? What's the verdict on the new move cards? I don't love them. I don't love them. I started playing them and I lost a bunch of games, and then I started playing this instead, and it seems like it's better. It's the Athena deck, right? Huh. Whoa. Well, shit. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo! By one! God damn. Chat, I'm gonna drop a PAX code into the chat. Let me know if it still works on the shop. It worked about 4 hours ago. Let me know if that still works, chat. Redemption successful. Nice, dude. Is that the Supreme shirt? No, it's the original. We got that Juicy J. Did I blow it? Huh, maybe, maybe not. I have no idea. We're just gonna hit the bar with no name on the right. You feel me? Are we not just dead to, like, Miles and what's-his-face, actually? He's not a sniper. Oh. Turns out all of our players. Batroc. How's this deck do against bounce move? I think it's okay. I'm off to bed. See you tomorrow on stream. Have a good one. Their Batroc did not move. Huh. Go to 26. Shoulder press. Will do. They're 24 cards in hand, so they're like Thanos Agamotto. Cool. In the world where the things that happen, but if they don't, it's because they have interaction for that right. That's my read, at least. I hope you get a rock, buddy. What was your job before you went full-time streaming? I was a writer. Fair enough. Close. They got my Mockingbird off a cable in a game where we had a sub